Hey guys, welcome back to RUE MORGUE TV. Andrea Subasati here. Be sure you stick around to the end of the episode because I want to give you a sneak peek at our 22nd anniversary issue on stands now. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Paul CORUPE and you're watching Conexploitation on RUE MORGUE TV. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1986 shot-on-video film Splatter, Architects of Fear. This is the story of how one of Canada's most goriest and obnoxious horror films ended up with only a PG rating. Now, there are not a lot of Canadian shot-on-video or SOV films that came out during the 1980s, but there's certainly a lot of kind of backyard movies like Things, Science Craze, very low-budget, amateurish kind of movies that ended up getting released on VHS tape. Splatter falls in with those films, but it's quite a bit more accomplished. It was actually directed by a guy named Peter Rowe, who had been doing Canadian film and television since the 1970s, and it's got kind of a very polished look to it. It does feel, in fact, like a National Film Board kind of educational style video at times. Back before the DVD era, before special features were so common, it was a lot more difficult to come across footage of behind the scenes of films where special effects artists like Tom Savini or Rick Baker would be making the magic behind the camera. But back in the VHS era, if you haunted the backs of video stores, you might have run across some of these special effects documentaries. One particular one, Screen Greats with Tom Savini, was a popular choice. And as well, there was also the Video Zone featurettes that often featured at the end of full moon video cassettes. Splatter, Architects of Fear is kind of like those films and certainly would have been on the shelf beside them in the video store. But what you get with Splatter, Architects of Fear is something that's a little bit different from what you might expect.
This tradition is alive in the many horror and fantasy movies we've come to love. Movies made by people, experts in their own fields, who all share a common goal: to thrill and scare the daylights out of you. Film crews, such as this one, at work on a new shocker at Gory Films Productions, are large and have many responsibilities to the final product, each of which is necessary, but by far, the stars of the show are the special effects themselves. Today's special effects team deals with new demands from increasingly sophisticated audiences. It's their job to make real the impossible and to make believable the unimaginable.
On first glance, Splatter plays a lot like some of these other behind-the-scenes documentaries. There's a narrator, there's shots of people making body casts and creating elaborate gore effects. You might notice, though, that the film that they're actually shooting behind the scenes of is never mentioned in Splatter, Architects of Fear, and there's a good reason for that. The film doesn't actually exist. The idea behind it was to actually create a whole bunch of gory film scenes and present them as part of an educational style video to get past Ontario's rigid censorship laws at the time. The film's ostensibly about a Toronto area effects and film company called Gory Films, that's PHILMS, of course. They're supposedly creating this kind of post-apocalyptic film in which a band of male mutants fights this band of Amazonian women. The narrator takes the viewer behind the scenes to show how the effects are done. Essentially, we see the finished scene as it might appear in the movie, if it existed, followed by kind of the behind-the-scenes look at how the effect was created, the work that went into it. The highlight of the film is actually seeing how these effects come off. So there's a guy who gets a crossbow in the teeth, there's an eye piercing, there's a woman who's dismembered with a power saw. But the film's most memorable scene is when one of the Amazonians seduces one of the mutants. They start to have sex standing up against a wall until the mutant's head explodes. At which point the Amazonian explains that
I fucked his brains out.
Now, it was a showcase for kind of the effects. The guy behind it all was this guy named Tim Mogg, who was a Toronto area effects guy. He actually worked on films like Death Wish 5 or Graveyard Shift, the Canadian film, not the Stephen King adaptation, as well as TV shows like Friday the 13th and the Kung Fu The Legend Continues. Personally, I'm really intrigued by films like Splatter. What is this movie? Is it a documentary? Is it a mockumentary? Is it an educational video? Is it a horror movie? It's kind of all those things at the same time. What's also interesting is that the film is very much served by the documentary, educational video kind of approach. A lot of the effects are kind of crude and not particularly convincing, but because they're presented as a how-to video almost, you're a little more forgiving when you're watching it. You already know that the body cast is made out of rubber, so it's not surprising when it starts flapping up and down when they start cutting it open.
Go for it!
Splatter, of course, further blurs the line between fiction and non-fiction by having the stars of the film be the actual crew members who are creating effects for a film that doesn't exist, but they're really creating it for Splatter. It all kind of gets a bit meta. One interesting piece of behind-the-scenes trivia is that they got access to a super slow-mo camera that had been used in Hockey Night in Canada, the Canadian TV sports showcase. This allowed them to do some very grueling, up-close, gory shots with the slow-mo camera as they pierced the eye of one of the CBC executives who volunteered for the job. Even though the film featured many extremely gory effects and it even had full frontal nudity, the film ended up with a PG rating. Censorship in Ontario at the time the film was made was very strict. You could not go to a video store and get a movie like I Spit on Your Grave or Bloodsucking Freaks, which were banned in the province. However, by framing it as an educational video, the Ontario Censor Board agreed to give the film a PG rating. It was only later on that they realized their mistake and that the film was never intended to really show people how to make effects. According to the producer, the board actually realized their mistake later on and tried to go back and re-rate the film, but it was too late. The rating stood.
They are wizards who astonish with feats of black magic. They are artists who design death in unaccountable ways. They bring nightmares to life. They are the movie's special effects masters, the architects of fear.
Splatter Architects of Fear became probably one of the most lucrative and successful shot-on-video horror films ever made in Canada, selling all kinds of units down in the States where they were available to rent by hungry gorehounds. But in the end, Splatter's legacy is certainly the way that it managed to trick the censors into giving it a PG rating. And it's so successful at this that even today, people watching the film don't always realize that it's for a non-existent film. Splatter Architects of Fear was one of the goriest films from the 1980s, but 30 years have passed since then, so let me know in the comments below what you think the goriest film Canada's ever made to date is. This has been Paul CORUPE. Join me next time for Canucksploitation on RUE MORGUE TV.
Jeez, I can't watch Splatter. It's my favorite movie. Oh, gosh. Nothing's on. I can't watch nothing. Running out of food. The rats are asleep. Oh, geez. What am I going to do? I'm bored. No mutants. No Amazons.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of RUE MORGUE TV. Just a reminder, issue 190, our double-wide 22nd anniversary Halloween issue of RUE MORGUE is on stands now, and we've got a feature on a decade of slasher films from the 80s that you might have missed. We've got a feature on the Creepshow series, on Memory, which is a documentary on the origin of the Alien films. All this and more in issue 190, so be sure to pick that up. I'll have a link in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.